This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
I do consider myself half Vulcan. I did draw the line low at having my ears surgically altered.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz.
And I'm Gil Adler.
Today we're talking to a guy named Roger Nygard. And Roger, a terrific documentary he did a bunch of years ago called Trekkies.
Team to go, please. You like cheese on a superstar or without? Without cheese?
Have you ever served a Klingon before?
Yes.
We actually take turns being different characters, and it helps our
Relationship, yeah.
Yeah, it does.
How's it going out with different people?
Roger tapped into this passion inside the fan base, and he's gone on since then to well, he was a filmmaker doing various things before then. He had directed a couple of small features. He is these days he's an editor. He earns his bacon cutting Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's also cut The Office and directed The Office. He's a super talented guy, but you know, the thing that everybody knows him for the most part, which isn't fair, is Trekkies, because so much more to the guy, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, you're gonna love this one. This is a really, really delicious one.
I wanted to start out this conversation with Roger, with the common link, really, that initially brought us all together. Scott Nimmerfro, who wrote and produced, among other things, Tales from the Crypt, and he did a ton of TV shows. We're putting together a whole special episode about Scott that Roger is part of. It's coming along. We're putting that together. But we wanted to talk today about Roger because Roger is a filmmaker in his own right and a terrific filmmaker and a craftsman in 1,000 different ways. But the common link that brought us all together was Scott Nimmerfro. Scott was part of I think of it now, a Minnesota mafia.
Right, the ice pack. That's the other phrase.
The ice pack, yeah. You know, when Scott and I wrote together, we put your name into every single thing we wrote. Were you even aware of that?
I know that there was a character named after me in one of the episodes of The Outer Limits, I think, but his name was never said aloud, and so it was only in the script.
Yeah. But hey, one way or the other, you know, it got there. He put your name into everything we ever wrote. It was hilarious.
Yeah, well, you know, we had there was always a competition when we were in college and we were making our crazy videos where we would try to outdo each other or out-reference each other. Usually the references were not each other's names, but they were Star Trek phrases from the original series because we had all memorized every episode.
Huh. You guys were Trekkies.
Jim, our friend Jim, was the most Trekkie of all of us. And then Scott and I were sort of Trekkies by association and loved the show. But we also just loved TV in general and science fiction and horror and fantasy and the whole spectrum. We weren't just Star Trek fans. I mean, I loved... When I was growing up, I watched The Time Tunnel and The Immortal and UFO and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and, you know, the list, Night Gallery. I loved all of these things, and Star Trek was just one of them.
Yeah. I still think of the Night Gallery pilot as having I still think of it constantly.
That whole first season, first season is amazing. The season 3 is awful. Because they cut the budgets and changed a lot of the writers, and it became sort of, you know, like the third season of Lost in Space, where everything just went crazy.
Coen Brothers also came out of Minnesota. There's what's in the water there?
It's more in the frozen water. I think everyone's brains get frozen for 6 months of the year, and it forces you. What can you have to stay inside, and all you can do is think or read or things that or try to stay alive, by collecting enough food and firewood. But I guess that has some sort of effect on people in terms of for me, it was really pronounced in my existentialism obsession, where when you're sitting freezing in a room and the whole world outside your window looks like a wasteland, you just think, what is the point of everything? Why do we exist? Eventually that manifested in a project, but what comes along with that is that sense of absurdity and a sense of humor about the absurdity of the universe. And that's part of it.
Scott came from German stock. Your last name is Nygard. That suggests Scandinavian background. It's not Ingmar Bergman movies were, had that grayness seemed to create a feeling of what was the point of all this?
Yeah, there's something in that brings it out, I think. But along with it comes a very dry sense of humor, where you have to make fun of your life and the universe or you go mad.
Certainly that is stamped all over movies like Fargo.
Keeps you from losing your mind, especially when the sun disappears for several months in the winter.
Is there a movie that you remember seeing first that made you, I don't know, want to be part of this world?
All these movies I would watch with my father, like Mysterious Island, or anything that Ray Harryhausen was involved with.
Oh, sure.
The original King Kong. I used to stay up and watch at midnight. I'd usually go to sleep at 8. My bedtime was 8:00 when I was a child. So I would set my alarm and wake up at midnight so I could watch Horror Incorporated, which was the local creature feature where they play old movies and, Dracula and Frankenstein movies. And I just was obsessed with these monster movies and science fiction, them and the giant ants, and all of these things would then creep into my brain and my subconscious. And Scott Nimmerfro and I shared that because that was the local series, Horror Incorporated, and their creature feature, and the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and all of these things came back as when we met at the University of Minnesota, we would make short little horror spoofs. That was probably the most common creative outlet we had, was to do spoofs of Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, which were the popular or the most current successful movies of the generation when we were in college.
Were you working in Super 8?
Originally, 8mm, regular 8 is where I started.
Regular 8. Wow. I mean, yes. That's how I started. The very first movies I ever made when I was 15 and 16, were regular 8 and then Super 8, and cutting them together on the little editing machines with Scotch tape, more or less. Yeah.
I've got a picture of me sitting at my desk with my 8mm films and Scotch taping them together. And because that's what my dad had. My dad had an 8mm camera, a Bell and Howell, the same one that Zapruder used to film the JFK assassination. Basically, it was a very popular model, and you had to flip over. It was 16mm film that you had to flip over halfway through in the dark. So you had to learn how to do it, change the film in complete darkness, or otherwise you ruin the whole thing. Then you mail it off, and then they split it down the middle and splice it into an 8mm with a roll with sprockets on one side instead of both sides, like 16mm. Super 8 was actually beyond I couldn't even imagine, because rich people had that. Eventually I worked my way up to Super 8.
Like CinemaScope.
Oh, well, CinemaScope for me was 3/4-inch video when we got to college. Imagine, you can shoot on video now, and all the opportunities, the way you could edit so much differently, even though it was linear editing, it was still, you could move things around, you could change your mind a little bit, whereas with film, it was much harder.
Which of the Minnesota Mafia moved west first?
It was me. I spearheaded it. I got an apartment in North Hollywood on Lancashire, which was 380 square feet.
Wow.
It's just this tiny place.
What year is this? This is
1985.
Yeah.
September of 85. Scott came out next and stayed with me. And so we were roommates until he got his own place. But imagine, this is a one room with 2 couches, and the couch was the bed, and that's all. And then a kitchen area, and then a bathroom. The end. And we shared that place. Sometimes 3 people were sharing that place. And, as we didn't know anybody. I didn't know a single person when I moved out here.
Yeah. Huh.
I mean, it was a common sight to see someone in that apartment building, with a shotgun under his coat, or drinking malt 45 malt liquor by the pool at 11 a.m. And it was right next to an auto parts store. And so you could hear people banging on their cars constantly. Moving to Los Angeles is sort of a baptism by fire. And if you're going to survive the competition that so naturally comes out of such a popular profession, you're going to need to prove yourself. And so the world isn't made of pillows and soft corners. You have to have tools for surviving those sharp edges and all those slings and arrows and knives being thrown at your back that are going to come in this business.
And not much outrage, but not much fortune. Alas.
Well, the lucky ones, are very fortunate, right? You're looking for that home run, or at least a bunt to get to first base so you can work in the business. And Scott and I and our friends slowly did that.
Yeah. What was your first? All right. So you're out here. You don't know anybody. You're living, man, in a hellhole, in a hellish part of town. All right. So what was your battle plan as you hit the ground?
Well, I've always, I've never half-assed anything. I always did my homework in school. Got straight A's. Not that bright, but I work hard. And so that was my superhero strength, is I'll work harder than anybody. That's what I'm thinking. There's always room for a good quality person, even, no matter how tight the job market is. That was my hope. What
skills were you bringing in, and what did you think you were selling?
Someone who is reliable. You can count on that person.
Okay.
If you give them a task, you don't ever have to worry about it again. That kind of thing. Which is the Midwestern.
But you weren't breaking into just any business here. You came to Los Angeles to break into one particular business.
Yeah, I wanted to make movies. I wanted to direct a James Bond movie, or something like that. And no small goals.
All right.
But how do you do it? You don't really know. You just know you need to get out there and get into it somehow. Get into the swim of the river. So in my small apartment, I stuffed envelopes, literally almost 1,000. It was about 950 resumes that I mailed out to every single name. I got the book listing all the production companies in Hollywood, and a lot of those I didn't realize were just some guy at a house, who wasn't going to hire me. It's all about timing, right? And the shotgun approach. If my resume arrived the day that somebody had put in their notice at one place, so I got a call. I got about a 1 out of 100 response rate. So if I'd only sent out 100 letters, I may not have heard from anybody. 8 or 9 phone calls that led to 3 meetings and 2 job offers. And then I took one, which was as the runner or messenger for Rollins, Joffe, Moore, and Bresner, who had a deal on the Paramount Pictures studio lot. So I suddenly was introduced to what it's like at a studio, working at a company with producer managers who had a production deal. And so then I started observing and learning, and things I could never have learned any other way.
What was some of the most surprising things about the business as your eyes began to grow wide?
How much failure there was. Yeah. These successful guys I worked for couldn't get a movie made. Huh. for years and years. They were pitching and hiring writers, and they had a production deal based on their clients. They had the clients were luminaries. They had David Letterman, Woody Allen, Martin Short, Robin Williams, and Billy Crystal were the big 5. And then other up-and-comers like Jim Carrey and Jimmy Brogan. What's his name? Markowitz, who wrote Good Morning Vietnam. I forget his first name. Stu Silver, who wrote Throw Mama from the Train. Good Morning Vietnam was the one they finally got off the ground. Robin Williams was ice cold at the time. He was set to star in it. It was written for him. Mitch Markowitz, that's the writer's name. He was a TV writer who Larry Bresner helped develop this idea for Robin Williams based on a treatment that they optioned by this guy who had been to Vietnam. And they completely changed the treatment into this comedy story about, a DJ in Vietnam. Paramount passed, and then they took it to Disney, and Disney said yes. Robin was ice cold because he had just done 4 or 5 bombs in a row, culminating
wasn't Popeye
in Club Paradise was the most recent. Do you even remember Club Paradise? No,
Yikes.
But it had an all-star cast, everybody from SCTV, and Robin Williams starring, and it was just awful. And Robin couldn't get anything. But Good Morning Vietnam was, did 140 million, I think, and relaunched Robin Williams' career. And then these, kept these guys in business. And then they got Throw Mama from the Train made, and then The Burbs, and Billy Crystal was attached to star in The Burbs. And then Billy dropped out, and they were going to sue Billy for dropping out, but then they got Tom Hanks instead, which was as good or better at the time. So anyway, I was watching these producer managers, how they worked in the business, and their biggest lesson I learned from them, because they're managers, was how to say no. Because they had to say no to a lot of projects in order to pick the one that they, what are you going to put your money on? Which stock are you going to pick? You want to pick the stock that's going to go up in value, not the one that's going to reduce your own value by association. And that's what they were trying to do in terms of building careers for their clients and ultimately for themselves as managers.
You were getting really, man, you could not take that from a book.
No.
Well, all right. So in watching them struggle to get movies made, you were still, that became your ambition ultimately to get your own movies made. You were writing stuff at this time, imagining stuff. You're getting into the grind of coming up with stuff, pitching stuff, writing stuff.
I was writing scripts. Scott Nimmerfro was writing scripts. We were sharing each other's scripts and getting, reactions from each other. One of the beautiful things about getting a job like I did working for this company is that tons of scripts came across my desk every day because they would submit scripts for us to read for the clients of the company, and hoping we would like it and then pass it on to Billy Crystal to consider as a project. Yeah. And so I read every script that came across my desk, and I started to notice patterns of the successful ones, which I much later learned was the 3-act structure, which no one had taught me in college, that there's a formula that works for writing successful movies. And it's not a formula that the studios dictated. It's just the way that human beings like their stories told to them. Ever since Aristotle, in the Poetics, realized this and first articulated, the Greeks, when they were telling stories, people like their stories told with a hero and an enemy, and then obstacles and goals. If you don't have these things, you're going to lose your audience fast, right? And so I started to, just by osmosis, by reading a lot of scripts.
This is how we like it. It's just our nature. Ascension creatures.
Then when Scott got the job working for Richard Donner, same thing. All these scripts are passing over his desk. They were coming in for the Donners and for the Silver, for Silver and for Hill, and he's reading everything and absorbing and writing. And our early scripts are terrible. They're awful because we had no mastery yet. We had, a beginnings of talent and practicing what we had, getting better and better. And so you have to immerse yourself in the business. And if you're going to write screenplays, you have to read a lot of screenplays and look at why they work. If you want to be an architect, you have to understand the structure of a house. That's where the beauty comes from. My real estate agent always, would say, "Oh, this place has great bones." Well, yeah, that's because it has a good substructure. And that's where the beauty comes from, not from the ornamentation that you hang on to it. People make the mistake, I noticed, in working for later in my career, when I started working for comedy showrunners, people often made the mistake of, this isn't funny enough. We need to punch it up. We need to make the jokes funnier. And the way Larry David approaches a scene is he doesn't try to write funnier punchlines, although they do that. He looks at there's something wrong with our premise. How do we make our premise funnier? He'll look at the setups. We spend more time fixing setups on Curb Your Enthusiasm than we do trying to think of a funnier punchline. Because all comedy comes from the situation you create. If you create a funny situation, funny jokes will naturally come out of that situation. And so that's a lesson I learned from Larry David and Sacha Baron Cohen and Dave Mandel and Alec Berg. And so that's what I sort of downloaded into my book, Cut to the Monkey, about everything I learned about comedy. I finally, coalesced into a book and tried to share it with in mind filmmakers and young filmmakers who, if only I had this guidebook when I started out, I would be that much further ahead. That was my mentality in writing the book.
It's a great title. Cut to the Monkey is a fantastic title for your book. I have not read it yet. I would love to. I'm going to.
Oh, you're going to love it.
I'm going to buy myself a copy, and I'm going to insist that you sign it, Roger.
It's going to change your life forever.
One observation I'll make, if you think about it, your success has gone through from passion, starting with a passion, and perseverance. And it seems to me a lot of us learn that along the way, that in our business especially, it's about passion initially, and then having the perseverance to take all the slings and arrows, as you mentioned earlier, of rejection. And I think, what you're describing so far to our audience is really about that. Do you have the passion? Do you have the perseverance to continue? And while you're doing that, learn.
And you're going to find this is common amongst all or many of the successful people in the business. I was just speaking with Ken Burns for my next book about making documentaries, and he said almost the exact same thing, that when he started out, he decided, I'm going to work harder than anyone else. And he kept a book, two giant 3-ring binders on his book of all the rejections he got from people from his first documentary, Brooklyn Bridge, about the Brooklyn Bridge. And he said people would look at him and laugh, go, oh, you're trying to sell me the Brooklyn Bridge, are you, kid? and make fun of him. And no one would buy it. But he finally got it made, and it won an Academy Award and launched his career. And he says he still to this day feels like he tries to work harder than anyone else. And it's never, that's who he is.
The analogy that I like to think of is cake and icing. The cake is what's important. But there are people who will obsess over the icing, which is okay. It's important what the cake looks like. Right. But if it tastes like shit, even the prettiest icing is not going to make that an enjoyable piece of cake. So yeah, worry about the cake. Yeah, the icing's important, but the cake is everything.
Yeah, right. What's the substance? What's the subtext? And this is something I learned in my documentary making. Is great documentaries have a theme at its core, at its base, which is an idea, a premise, a concept, a grievance, something that the filmmaker wants to get across to the audience through the telling of the story, utilizing these people, these real people, to tell the story. And if you don't know what your theme is when you start out making a documentary, that's sometimes where filmmakers go astray, and I don't know how to edit this together. I don't. They run out of gas halfway through, or they don't finish it, or it ends up just being a meandering film. Whereas a documentary, just like a narrative, needs a 3-act structure. Ideally, to hold an audience, the best way to hold an audience is to set up a mystery at the beginning, some kind of idea or mystery that you're going to solve by the end of the documentary, which will keep people watching until the end because they want to see what the resolution is. And sometimes there are built-in endings, like the verdict, a jury's verdict, or who's going to get selected to go to the majors, and will the guy be released from prison? Will they get married or not? You'll see in reality shows they've co-opted that in a sense and made it a game show, basically. Who's going to win at the end? Who'll get voted off the island? But it's the same principle.
You have your documentary subjects have kind of, well, you've asked big questions where can you really answer that mystery? The meaning of life, the meaning of marriage, in essence. How to succeed in marriage. But before we'll get to your documentary work, having worked at the Rollins Jaffe office, you understood independent filmmaking, and that was kind of your first forays. You made a little independent movie called High Strung.
Okay, so you've been holding the puppy, and he's so cute. For that one little second in time, you really love him, and you give him a squeeze, but he's so cute, you just want to squeeze him a little harder. Yeah. Well, there you go. There's a direct tie-in between love and wanting to kill something.
That's my first feature length. Yeah, after years of lots of short films.
Yeah.
But that's the brass ring, right? You want to make a feature film as a filmmaker. Every filmmaker trying to make a feature. And I had written many screenplays, none of which had gotten produced, feature screenplays. But I met a writer named Steve Odekirk, who was a comedian. Scott Nimmerfro introduced me to him because when Scott used to work at the Comedy Store, he met a lot of comics, and they would send him his screenplays when he got this development adjacent job working for Richard Donner. And Scott said, "Hey, there's this low budget comedy that we're not going to do it. No one's going to do it. Do you want to? You should read it." So I read it, and I laughed my ass off. Steve Odekirk wanted to direct it himself, and I said, "Look, what if I can raise the money? Let me direct it. You'll star in it as you're planning to do." And he thought, "Oh, okay, sure, go ahead," thinking this, it's not going to happen. And I found a guy with money who said yes, who read the script and laughed, a rich person. It's about talking rich people out of their money, basically. The successful filmmakers have to know how to talk rich people into writing checks. And so I did, and we made it for about $350,000.
Wow. And
it starred Steve Odekirk, and it got released barely as an indie film through a very tortuous process that was disappointing and challenging and hard on everybody, but it got out there and found a core audience. Did film festivals, but didn't really make a big splash or launch my career, the way that like Sex, Lies, and Videotape did for Steven Soderbergh, for instance, right? But that's like winning the lottery. You can't count on winning the lottery. So you have to slog forward and, okay, what's next? Got to do something else. What am I going to do next? And I got a job in TV working kind of off of that. An agent hip pocketing me, did a hip pocket agenting job for me, which I don't know, for in non-business listeners, that's when an agent sort of takes you on unofficially and sometimes will help you out or support you or send you leads. And I got a job directing segments as a segment director for a comedy show on Fox called Haywire, which was tied for dead last in the ratings of that year. I'm kind of proud of the fact, along with this show by David Lynch that was all just images, no dialogue, and with like these visual essays. If you can imagine that on a network, and it was wonderful, but nobody watched it. And my show that I worked on was replaced, the same slot, that half-hour comedy slot was revamped and became the Ben Stiller comedy show. But anyway, that got me to the next rung, right? You're just going from one rung to the next. And eventually I wrote a screenplay with Scott Nimmerfro called American Yakuza 2 Back to Back. And it was an assignment from a company called Neo Motion Pictures. And they allowed us to submit pitches because they had optioned a script I had written many years ago called The Dog of the South, based on the Charles Portis book. I had optioned his book, read his book, loved it. Charles Portis, of course, wrote True Grit, and which is what you can see, the Coen Brothers with a similar dry sense of humor liked True Grit and remade it. But they liked that script, and so that just got me in the door. They liked the work that Scott and I did for our pitch, so we got the job of writing the script, and so that led to my second project, directing a feature film for Overseas Film Group, which is just designed for foreign sales. Mm-hmm. And Robbie Little just said to me, I need 5 action set pieces. Give me that. That was all he basically cared about.
Right.
Then he could sell it. He could make his his guys could make their trailer, go to the AFM, make pre-sales based on some cast, and the film did very well for them. It cost them about $2.2 million to make and grossed about $6 or $7 million. So that's what they're looking for, singles and doubles in a foreign sales company like that, because a lot of that is pre-sold, right? They get the money for the budget in advance. And so, but that didn't launch me into the stratosphere either. So what's the next handhold? Just need to be creative every day. But I had met Denise Crosby, an actress, through High Strung. I had cast her in a role in High Strung, and over lunch, she pitched me the idea of doing a documentary about Star Trek fans. Right. And I said, "Oh, great! I can't believe no one's done it. We should do that."
And that was so. Originally the idea came from Denise Crosby.
Yeah, and a lunch we had.
The right person.
Well, she mentioned it to somebody who doesn't fuck around, who doesn't half-ass things. And so if I say I'm going to do something, it fucking gets done, and it may not be $1 million deal, but it'll get done.
Right, but you asked the essential question: why hasn't anybody done this?
It seems so obvious.
Yeah, and
right.
And Trekkies is really a lovely piece. It's, as far as I can tell, it's the first movie that recognizes the fans for who they and what they really are, which is a lovely group of people.
No one had made a feature fan documentary before us. We sort of launched a genre. It's the grandfather of fan docs, which became an industry unto itself. But it was not the first fan documentary ever, because I had been influenced by a documentary I had seen years before when I was watching crazy stuff. I loved it when videotape finally came out and you could get VHS tapes. I found a documentary called Mondo Elvis. And it was a short film. It's only 30 minutes long. Mondo means world, right? World of Elvis. And it just featured these crazy, obsessed Elvis fans who believed he was still alive, or believed they were carrying his baby, or it was hilarious because they're so dead serious about their obsession. And that's what Trekkies became, a portrait of obsessed people, obsession, which is really funny if you're outside of it. Anytime people get really serious about something, if you're not a part of that group, it's funny to watch. And I replayed that ethos in The Nature of Existence, where I'm profiling all these different religions. If you're a part of a religion, all your rituals are really important and dead serious. But if you're not a part of that religion and you see somebody doing their rituals, it looks ridiculous.
It's ooga booga. What are you doing?
What is that crazy costume you have to wear? Or else Invisible Man is going to get angry if you don't wear the right serape or hat or gown. I have this, I guess, within me, compassion for my subjects. I apparently I'm not a sociopath, because I do like my subjects, and I like people. I love people. I love humanity. It's individual people we hate, right? I love humanity, but I hate people. That's usually how it goes. But I try to make a film that the people who are in it can watch and enjoy just as much as the people who are outside of it. So you can laugh at it or with it, both. It's really like a Rorschach test. It's what's in you, you'll see, because I'm not telling you this is funny or crazy. I'm just saying, here it is. What do you think? And through juxtaposition, I can make things funnier or more apparent, but I really try to avoid taking a position of what's good or bad.
You are letting the people and their context speak entirely for themselves. And within their context, they're utterly normal and, in fact, quite genuine and authentic, and their passion is organic. And I would even, having just rewatched Trekkies before we talked, and it's really, your empathy for your subjects is there in every single frame. You not for 2 seconds are you ever mocking them, ever, not even remotely. In fact, it becomes quickly clear that you enjoy their passion as much as they enjoy their passion.
I do. I love it. And that's what draws me back. And I believe making a documentary is sort of like trying heroin once. It's addictive. You can't, I'll just try heroin once. What's the big deal? I'll try making a documentary once. I'll make this Trekkies thing once and then move back to this other stuff I like. No, that became going forward, documentaries became my most valued pursuit from that point forward.
As a narrative form.
As a way of expressing myself creatively in a motion picture format, which I wish they had a stronger narrative, though, I'll be honest, because I think there's two kinds of documentaries. There's two kinds of people in the world, right? But there's narrative documentaries like Hoop Dreams, where you're following people,
sure,
or Brother's Keeper, or these people have the problem. Are they going to solve it? How will it end? And then there are concept documentaries like Food Inc., which ask big questions. Why is corporate food so harmful for us? And answering that question by the end. Or The Social Dilemma. Why is social media so harmful to people, and what can we do about it? That's the premise and the question they ask at the beginning, and that by the end they give an answer. But we've been waiting for. We're hungry for the answer to this. And I do that. I've done this. Those are harder to make, and for some masochistic reason, that's what I like to do. Is I like to take a premise or a question. The more impossible to answer the question, the more challenging, the more intrigued I am by it. Because after taking on existentialism, how do you make a documentary about existentialism? I mean, what hubris to think I can do what Schopenhauer labored his whole life, or Kant or Locke or Hume. Or Camus.
Apparently, you can take the Nygard out of Scandinavia, but you cannot take the Scandinavia out of a Nygard.
It's innate in those cold weather countries to become immersed in existentialism. But I took it on and made a documentary and asked the question, why do we exist? And found an answer for myself by the end.
450 hours of footage, 175 interviews. That's what you that's a massive amount of material to have to stew down into. It's an hour and a half.
90 minutes, 93 minutes. Yeah, it's crazy. It's idiotic to take on a task like that. So the doing of the task has to be the point of the task, not the completion. In other words, the journey, right? It's the journey, not the arrival. You have to enjoy the journey.
How long did the Trekkies project take to finally get from when you started to when you finally, okay, there's the cut, I'm done? Trekkies
was like a Exocet rocket. It was 9 months from shooting our first footage to a final cut. It went so fast. Because the footage was so rich, we had a movie very quickly, as you could imagine. You go to a convention, we could film anybody, and they were all so colorful that we quickly had a movie of some kind, a deeply flawed movie, because it does not have that consistent narrative arc that a documentary is supposed to have.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, it held attention apparently for 90 minutes, and even though our film is so flawed, everyone copied those flaws going forward because it became the paradigm for success for fan documentaries, because it was so successful financially and critically. And, it bought my house. It was a huge success. Even though it had all these flaws, film can succeed even though it doesn't follow the rules.
If you were to go back in and, all right, knowing what you know now, having the experience now, if you were to go back and remake Trekkies, how would you refocus it?
It should be like Denise Crosby goes on a journey with a quest or a goal, or finding 2 or 3 or 4 specific Star Trek fans and watching them live out their day, or whatever it is they're going to a convention or setting up a convention, something goal oriented that they need to succeed at. That's very challenging. That's the proper way to do it. But it wouldn't have been Trekkies. It wouldn't have been what it is. And it's really, I think it's charmed in the unusual quality of what it is. And because we were so naive about what we were doing.
The fans, they really are remarkable. I just 6 months ago, I'd never been to a horror convention at all, ever. And I went to one with Jason Stein, who is one of the executive producers of our podcast. He's one of the dads from the crypt. And I found the experience enlightening. the crowd of people, it was a smaller one. It was basically people sitting at tables and lots of people selling merch, all kinds of merch. And lots of people dressed up, cosplay. There was the thing that just blew my mind was she couldn't have been more than 5. And she had a custom made Leatherface costume, right down to a size appropriate chainsaw. And her mom had obviously worked very hard on this costume. And here's the weird thing about horror conventions. Nobody ever does cosplay or dresses up as any of the victims. Everybody dresses up as the monster.
Right. Yeah.
And
the villains. We love the villain, good villain.
Yeah. Everyone, people are not usually there to sign autographs of people who died in the movies. Yeah, some people will have died, but it's the monsters. They love the monsters because the monsters are empowered. And I think what I found, which was surprising and enlightening, and I was thrilled to see it, for them, that whole fan experience is empowering.
It's also a monster is a side of ourselves that we all have that gets loose, and you can let it loose at the convention and it's safe.
Why am I here and what is my purpose? Am I supposed to start a family? Fight for some cause? What is the point of everything?
Everything created is one thought in the life of God.
Boom, boom, and then that developed into, human beings at McDonald's.
Man's purpose is to chase women.
I think we exist because God created us because he was lonely.
The reason we're here on this planet is to eat good barbecue.
What is religion for most people, really? It's a way to socialize. It's a social experience, whether you're going to church or temple or whatever, that you're going there to talk to people, to meet your friends and listen. Okay, we got to listen to the talk and then it'll be over. Then I can talk to my friends. And conventions are the same aspect of, we are social beings and we need to socialize and be around people and interact with people. And it gives people a chance to go and interact with others. And sometimes in a way that they feel is more genuine to who they actually are. I was profiling Renaissance people, Renaissance fair people in one. I did a pilot for a TV series based on Ren fairs, and they said that the people who went to Ren fairs said, "I am myself at the Ren fair. I'm not myself at the office in my everyday life."
There's something, as I think of it, and I think of CreepyCon, which I went to. Yeah, I think there's very definitely something religious about it, but it's not monotheistic; it's polytheistic. And in a sense, there are all these gods, and polytheistic gods are not, they don't lord it over humans. Humans and polytheistic gods, they kind of walk around together. They're made of the same stuff. And it's actually a healthier universe. All right, I'm leaping forward into the nature of existence. Your terrific documentary about why are we here?
I know the answer though. Now I learned. I know why we're here. Now I've solved it. I moved on to the next mystery.
Okay, what's the next mystery?
Well, after that, it was right when you go to film festivals. There's going to be a Q&A afterward.
Yeah,
and so you've got to answer questions. And one of the invariable questions is, "Oh, what are you working on next?" And so you have to be ready for that. And so I came up with a funny answer. Well, after working on the nature of existence, I had to find something even more inexplicable than existence itself. So my next topic is marriage, which got a big laugh from people.
Well, now when you did Trekkies, did the world surprise you?
I was constantly surprised. Every convention, I was surprised. Every person I met, when we went to their house with them to film them, it was surprising.
Then when you did your next documentary, The Nature of Existence, did the world surprise you again?
Constantly. I mean, when I went to Israel and found a rabbi in Jerusalem, and he was explaining the concept of isness to me. He went on for about a minute explaining what is isness. And it's, by the time he finishes, it's kind of hilarious because it's such a convoluted way of describing a simple word, isness, of being, and God is in a state of isness. God is outside of now and is outside of never and is in this thing called isness, and he was explaining it. And I was just like, wow, it's so deep. Either I'm really stupid or that's ridiculous, and I can't tell the difference. But I give him the respect, let him make his point. I put it in the movie without, shading it one way or the other. And it's an amazing moment. And that's juxtaposed with the with the Christian wrestlers in Atlanta, Georgia, or just outside of Atlanta, who put on a passion play in a wrestling ring. And like, what am I watching? They beat the hell out of each other, and then Jesus shows up, the lights turn red, and then the wrestlers all beg for repentance. And this, people are lapping it up in the audience. And from that, I went to China and met Confucianists and Taoists. And I ended up I met an old woman who must have been 85, who was grinding her own grain, pushing this cement wheel around. And so I said, can I try that? That looks like good eating. So I jumped in and I pushed the wheel, the grain, the flour grinder with this 88-year-old Chinese woman who she couldn't speak English. I couldn't speak Chinese. You never know what's around the corner. That's part of the beauty of making documentaries. It's like it forces you to go out into the world on a journey of exploration. There's so much amazing, so many things to experience in this world, and you'll never run out. And when I meet people who are like, I'm bored, what? There's so much to see and do and learn. How can anyone be bored? And it's just mind-boggling to me. And I guess hopefully my documentaries have that same enthusiasm for exploration and learning and solving mysteries and getting to the bottom of, okay, what is my purpose in life here? Or how can I better get married? Why am I not married? What's wrong with me? Why can't I hold a relationship together? Something's wrong. If 50% of the marriages fail in this country, if I made a product with a 50% failure rate and put it on the market, people would run me out of town and say, go back to the drawing board. But for some reason, people are clamoring for this product that is going to fail. But they all think, oh, no, not me. It's not, I'm going to be special, but they're not. It's the myth of exceptionalism is what the psychologists call it. Everyone thinks, well, we're exceptional. It's not going to happen to us. 2 years later, it's happening to them. And so something's wrong. So I'm going to solve it. And so I've basically found answers to what's going on psychologically. There are explanations for why we have these problems. And it's all solvable if you just learn. And if you open yourself up to learning or understanding. You don't know. I don't know all the answers, but they're out there and I can find them. And so that's what I do. And it's one constant surprise after another.
Did doing The Nature of Existence change the way that you thought about the world? What did you walk into that before you started it? How did you think? Were you
radically? Yeah, I was depressed. And dispirited and disoriented. And it was, to me, there was 3 times in my life. I'll tell you briefly. The first time when I was around, 7 or 8 or 9, around the time I discovered cameras, but in Minnesota, it was in the winter. I remember vividly walking out onto the frozen lake and laying down and looking up at the stars. And I felt like I was certain I was going to die. And it's because I had I'd gotten into our encyclopedias. I love reading in the encyclopedia. And I came upon diseases, and I was reading about diseases, and I was certain that I had a terminal disease because, the symptoms were constant fatigue and coughing. And it's like, I'm coughing sometimes and I'm always tired and, oh no, I'm good. So I went out, laid down to die, looked up at the stars, and pretty soon I was getting cold and hungry. I said, well, I better go in and have dinner. I didn't die. But it opened an idea of my own mortality, which at some point as a child, you eventually realize you're not this permanent being, which you assume you are from the beginning. Somebody dies. And when my father died when I was 13, from multiple sclerosis, which was a horrible way to go. Multiple years of fading away until he was weighed, a third of what he was down to probably, 60 pounds, 55 pounds, just bones and skin, and couldn't speak. And with multiple sclerosis, sometimes you die by drowning. on the fluids in your lungs, and it's just, you can't move, and awful. And when he died, I asked the minister at our church, something I don't get, because everybody has all these platitudes when someone dies, he's gone to a better place, blah, blah, blah. It's like, really? What's better? Here's what I don't get. What version of him is in this heaven? Is it the version I last saw of him where he couldn't speak? Is he going to be incapacitated for all eternity? Or is he transformed into a vibrant version? And well, we just don't know. We can't question. Why can't we question? We should be able to know these things. And so, well, he's going to be transport. We all get transferred to an earlier version of our best version of ourselves. Our best version. Okay, well, what if a baby dies? Is a baby suddenly transformed into an 18-year-old? Oh, and who chooses his major? It's like, it makes no sense. None of this makes sense. And they don't have answers, because really, the more you poke at religious belief, the less it's about answers. And it's really about, here are these mythologies, just take them and believe them, because you'll feel better. It's a code for living that'll help you feel better. But as science has progressed over the ages, science has explained things that we didn't understand before. Thunder and lightning used to be the gods were angry at us. Now we know it's electrons moving from one valence level to another. The end. And so God's territory has gotten smaller and smaller slice as science has increased. And so a lot of religions are pushing back and trying. That's why you see a lot of resistance to science and anti-science, because it's the enemy, right? It's eliminating religion. The third point for me, which when I questioned existentialism, was when 9/11, when our entire country watched 3,000 or so people die on television. Yeah. And we had to, as a country, for that week or moment, or as long as we could, until we could shove it under the carpet again in our brains, realize and consider, my life is impermanent. Their lives were impermanent. They had video of people leaping out of windows of the Twin Towers before they fell. And it's, you can never forget that and how you felt in that moment, because it makes you think about yourself. That could have been me. And someday that's going to be me. And that creates this huge anxiety. And how do you deal with that anxiety? And so we have, shrinks and drugs and diversions and video games, anything to forget about our own mortality. So I set out on my journey, which it was to solve for myself, what is the point of existence? And while I make the documentary, the viewer goes with me, and you learn what I learn. And my process for answering that question for myself, why do I exist, was to go and meet representatives of every major religion and scientists and atheists and ask them all to explain it. And then I juxtapose all their answers in the documentary. And if you want, I'll tell you what I learned.
Go for it.
I'll need 2 more minutes of this diatribe to tell you.
That's what we're here for.
This is where I arrived in my search for meaning.
Spoiler alert.
I'm going to spoil it for you. Here's the answer that I found. When we ask the question, why do we exist? Why do I exist? Usually what we're saying is, I'm not happy enough. How can I be happier? And how do I find happiness? And Julia Sweeney refocused that for me when I interviewed her. And she said, that's the wrong question. Happiness is not a goal. It's a side effect of pursuing your purpose in life. Because once you know your purpose, then you'll be happy when you're pursuing it as a natural side effect. And so the problem is, you don't know your purpose. You're not aware of it in any way. So how do you find your purpose? Well, no one can give you a purpose. You have to give yourself a purpose. It comes from within. And the answer is natural, really, because the universe that we are a part of is made of protons, electrons, neutrons, quarks, etc., planets and stars, and it's all interlocked and interchanging. And you've got stars that are being born and stars that are dying at the same time. It's this yin and yang of creation and destruction. Those are the 2 antipodes, opposites of our universe. There's opposites of everything. As we are a part of this, and for me, getting to this answer required a logical basis, not a religious one, although it works for a religious basis too, because you can believe that creation is good and destruction is bad, or the devil. And so you can align yourself with either pole. in life. You can create or you can destroy. It's easier to destroy, to tear things down, to be critical, to criticize others, to smash things. It's much harder to build things, to create. But that's where the joy, the real joy comes from creation. So if you align yourself with creation, you are going to naturally be happy, or much happier than you would be if you align yourself with destruction, which may give you a brief pleasure in the moment in this orgy of destruction, but it will lead to less happiness ultimately. So what does that mean? Being creative. What does that mean to be creative? Well, it means bringing forth some new synthesis of ideas or thoughts or material. You could like write a short story, make a podcast, write a book, write a poem, make a new dance, create a drawing, an architect for a house, design a new business plan, organize your garage. You're bringing order out of chaos. Anything that brings order out of chaos, that creates something new that you can show your social group. Planting a garden brings forth life. It creates. For most people, the default setting is to create a new version of ourselves, a small version that we hope will grow up and be a better version of who we are. And then that occupies people's attention for 18 years or however long it takes to get them to move out of the basement. And then you're back where you started going, what's my point now? And that's why you see a lot of retirees or people when the children have left taking classes and relearning things or learning things like pottery classes or painting classes or their swing dance. They're taking creative endeavors. They're getting back to the pursuit of creativity. And so if you create, you will be happy while you're creating. So if you have a job that's not creative, if you're moving papers from one tray to another and you can't wait until it's over, try to find time every day to be creative. Keep a journal, write your poem, paint, do something that you love inherently, where you enjoy the journey. Do it a little bit each day, and you'll be contributing to your purpose. And then when you finish it, you share it with your social group and you get feedback and you have interaction with people. That's the meaning of existence, is to find your purpose, and it's a creative one, to be creative daily in some way.
That is the product of 450 hours, 175 interviews. It is not just, you are not pulling that out of your ass.
That's a shot of existentialism espresso distilled down from all those interviews.
All right. So that's what you learned about the nature of existence. As you walked into the truth about marriage, you never talk, at least, do you ever talk about your relationships?
Yeah, well, I failed miserably, obviously, because I'm not married. And that was why I started wondering, what's wrong with me? Is it me? And it must be, because I'm the one common variable among all of my failed relationships. I mean, I got close to marriage 3 times, at least in my mind. I was talking or thinking about or envisioning myself married to the person I was dating. But it ended up breaking up, did not happening for various reasons, different reasons each time. But my new obsession became, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with marriage? What's wrong with relationships? They don't give you there should be a class in high school teaching us how to have good relationships, because it's arguably the most important thing we'll ever do in our lives is choose a life mate. But there's no guidance. It's like, okay, you're graduated, go figure it out on your own, trial and error, which is a lot of error and unhappiness and heartbreak and hurt feelings, and which leads to therapy and marriage counseling. And so I did use my same technique. I got dozens of marriage therapists and psychologists and anthropologists and social scientists and interviewed them all and asked them to explain to me what's wrong with this model.
We all know the statistics. Marriage rates are down, divorce rates are high, and over time, people become more and more dissatisfied in their relationships. Why are relationships so hard for people?
69% of problems that couples struggle with are perpetual problems. We call each other the work in progress. It's pretty much what our marriage has been.
It is a work in progress. I do the work and she makes the progress.
Yeah.
How much are people cheating on each other sexually?
10% of children don't belong to their father, on average.
Are you allowed to get a massage with a happy ending? Would that be cheating?
I'm pretty sure I'm not, but I'm not.
Oh, I think if you asked, I would say yes, you can do that. I think if you were in Thailand and you said,
Are you kidding me? I was just in Thailand.
I know, but you didn't ask. You should have asked. If you'd asked.
Almost 0% of engaged people think they are ever going to get divorced.
Women's criteria for what they find attractive in men changes depending upon where they are in their menstrual cycle. Couples should go off the pill for at least a year before they make any long-term commitments because they might not be compatible.
How did you get Jordan to commit to you?
I told him he could do whatever he wanted with anybody else.
That broke me.
She ran. I chased her. She caught me.
Who's the boss more often than not in a relationship?
Women.
The woman.
Women.
I have absolute say at the end, but I don't say anything.
You have conned us, man. Have conned us into thinking we're on Earth for you. You're on Earth for us and the kids. And if you do a good job, we'll keep you alive when you're an old fart.
You want the answer to this one too?
Yeah, hey, yeah, and the answer, as I watched it, seemed to be everything is wrong with the model.
Well, we're all doing relationships wrong.
Yeah.
That's what I learned to some degree. Yeah. But it's not our fault. We are living in a culture that expects us to behave in ways that are out of sync with who we are as a human being. And that happened about 6,000 years ago. There was a split when we switched from being nomads, living in small tribes of 130 or fewer, to discovering agriculture and now living in one place. And then these communities growing much larger, eventually becoming cities where we could no longer know everybody in our surroundings. When we lived in this tribal community, everyone knew everybody, everybody shared everything, everybody pulled their weight, and when they didn't, it was obvious. And so those who didn't pull their weight were ostracized or punished in some way until they were brought back into line or kicked out of the club, which it was pure communism, essentially. The natural state for human beings is communism in small groups. Communism doesn't work beyond 150 people.
Yeah,
because
the historian Yuval Harari is a great book called *Sapiens*, and he talks.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah, he really talks about exactly what you're talking about. Really, and we were successful like that for millions of years. For the largest part of our history, we were lived very successfully, and it's the agricultural revolution that changes us completely.
It messed everything up. Yeah. Chris Ryan wrote a book called *Civilized to Death*, where he takes this concept even further. How we are, if you go to a zoo, there's two kinds of zoos, right? There's the kind where animals are in cages and they look depressed and despondent and ready to die. Then there's the zoos where they create an environment that's open and natural, as close as they can to what's natural for that giraffe to live in, and they do much better in that environment. Yeah. We have created for ourselves a version of the caged zoo in our modern society, and that's what we're living in, and that's why everybody is more akin to the baboon who's very unhappy in his cage, as opposed to the one swinging through trees in a natural environment. So why not create environments that are more in sync with what's natural for us? Well, here's the problem. Once we expanded beyond small groups, and now there's millions of humans everywhere, we needed a different form of society to govern things so we could live in civilization, and that became rules and laws. And monogamy became the new rule. One person each publicly, because in the old days of the nomadic times, sex was not proprietary. You didn't own your own sexuality. The tribe did. So everyone had sex with everybody, or didn't hoard it to themselves, even when they partnered up. And that was natural then. Now that seems weird and strange because we're used to monogamy. But the thing is, nobody really is monogamous nowadays. At best, they're serial monogamists, going from one to the next and throwing out the old one. You know, if we were truly monogamous, we would stay together sexually with the very first person we mated with in high school or whenever it was. But we don't do that. So something is off. And the reason is because that people got jealous. In the agricultural times, some people got richer than others because they got more land and controlled more wealth. And so they started collecting and hoarding the women, which left a whole bunch of young men without women. And if you have young, horny, frustrated men without women, that causes trouble for society.
Still
so you gotta
it still does. Incels, man. It's the whole that's all that is the root of part of the root of their problem.
Part of the solution is monogamy, because then it's impossible for one person to hoard 1,000. I mean, the pharaohs and the sultans and the kings, they would have 5,000 concubines, literally 5,000s of concubines.
You remember the movie Dr. Strangelove? At the end, they're talking about how to repopulate the earth, and really it's exactly the thing that they're talking about. It's hoarding all the women, and the men can reproduce it with as many, because you want to have as much reproduction as possible. It's like squirt and go, squirt and go, squirt and go. That's
the way it was for the Sultan.
Yeah.
And they would keep track of the cycles. So they would only have sex with the fertile women who are ovulating and to maximize their output. But the problem is, when you got 5,000 young men with spears or guns who are very upset, you got a problem. So you've got to find a way to even things out. And even though it's not who we are naturally, it's what we need in order to maintain civilization today. That being the case, monogamy does work and can work for people. It just takes therapy and help sometimes, and ways to deal with it. And sometimes it's role play or date night or helping each other be satisfied in ways that they're hiding, because it's sometimes we meet someone, even we get married, we put on this mask because we put on our best self because we want this person to like us. It's pretty hard to hold that mask forever, right? There's a polygamous couple that I interview in the documentary, and it's, in order to make polygamy work, it takes total honesty.
Yeah.
So they know each other to a far greater extent than a monogamous couple generally does. And
they're the most interesting couple in the whole piece, because of their, they seem to have done the most work.
They're very high functioning couples in terms of their relationship, but that comes right through being able to be honest about who you are and what you like, and not hiding whatever your social preference is, your sexual preference, your desires and needs, so that they become met. In the old days, when we were nomads, we didn't require one person to meet all our needs. Today, you marry someone and you require them to meet all your needs, and it's impossible to do that. In the old days, one person was the storyteller, one was great at oral sex, one was a good hunter, etc. So everyone could be satisfied. I need a good story. I'm going to go hang out with Grog, the storyteller, today. I need an orgasm this morning. Everyone was who they were.
Everyone had.
When I was interviewing, I interviewed a Native American spiritual leader, a member of the Paiute tribe in the Nature of Existence. And he told how in the old days, when the Native Americans, in their tribal arrangement, they would have someone like him who was a spiritual leader, who was generally a gay man, which they call two-spirited, meaning he would have the spirit of a male and a female in one body. And they saw that as special and given special mystical status. And so this spiritual leader would guide them. And gay people are born into all societies. It's not by choice. You can't stop it. It's about the same percentage. For some reason, Mother Nature decided it's a good thing to have people of this type within a tribe or a society. And so Native Americans just worked it into their culture. It's natural. It happens. Okay, here it's worked in. And it's been harder to, for gay people in modern society to get worked in, when other constructs, generally religious based, have tried to impose their structure on. Well, here's a better way to deal with civilization. And so there's this push and pull from all these different angles, and that's why we're constantly at odds with people trying different angles, different things, because we're so far out of what's natural for human beings.
Die-hard atheist that I am, even a humble atheist can do unto others. I think that religion, the messages can be solid. It's all the rigmarole the mishagos, I think that's the technical term, surrounding it that justifies it.
Are you truly compassionate if you are nice to people out of fear that you'll be struck down by the invisible God? Or are you truly compassionate if you do it because it's innate within you?
Yeah, I think Paul, I mean, Jesus didn't invent Christianity, Paul did. And I think Paul was an absolute genius because Paul, first of all, he was selling a monotheistic idea, a monotheistic God to a polytheistic world. He couldn't sell, don't forget, Paul never met Jesus. He has his experience in his head on the road to Damascus, and he goes to Jerusalem, tries to sell his version of Jesus to everyone who knew Jesus, and their attitude was, well, no, that's not what he said, actually. And Paul takes his version out to the Gentiles because no one in Jerusalem is buying. But that's where Paul's genius takes over, because he's selling a lot of Jewish mythology to non-Jews who don't know, well, no, that's not how the mythology works. And where Paul's genius comes in, real Jesus is of no value to him. When dead Jesus is of value, it's Jesus dying and coming back is what Paul is selling. Hey, if you will follow this mythology the way that I'm telling you, if you believe in Jesus how I'm telling you to, right down to the grammar, just like Jesus, you can rise from the dead and live forever in a magical place called heaven with everyone you love. And they, again, a polytheistic world, the polytheistic gods didn't do anything for human beings. They were really no different. The whole thing that monotheism does is, hey, here's a God who will do something for you. If you follow him, he'll give you stuff. He'll make your life better. And then Paul takes it one step further. Hey, and there's a son, and if you believe in him the way I'm telling you, you can beat death. It's genius. But you have to follow the dogma down to, like I said, the grammar. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And hey, if you don't follow the grammar, if you don't follow the grammar, you're going to make it harder for me to get to heaven. And so now I'm going to look at you because hey, I need all of us to get to heaven for heaven to really work. And the next thing you know, you have strife because, hey, even within the Christian religion, how to get to heaven became conflicted. And
well, Paul's was the latest rewrite. You know how writers are, they rewrite. And that was his latest revision. And that one caught on pretty well.
Yeah, it's an intractable problem because the answer to the question of the nature of existence is inside every one of our heads, and we all perceive it differently. Not one of us can see the world through anyone else's eyes. We cannot experience anyone else's pain, and they can't experience ours. It's just not possible. The nature of existence got me thinking, again, having just watched it just before this. And yeah, it made a whole bunch of things pop into my head. We will link to it.
Good.
I recommend it. I think that one, I think it's for 99 cents or $1.99. I think I bought it for $1.99, Roger. I put some money in your pocket.
That's the best $2 you've ever spent.
Oh my God, yes. My question then is, all right, so and your documentary about marriage, which I also watched, I crammed these things yesterday. That got me thinking a lot about relationships. You absolutely have got me thinking. Did your documentary change the way that you felt about relationships? Did you feel better about your situation?
No, much better. Yeah. I mean, well, I just outlined the problem, right? We're out of sync with who we are. The solution, though, there is a solution, which is very simple. I'll give you the solution in 2 minutes. That distilling down 100 interviews, all of the experts in some way said the same thing, that in order to get along better with your partner, there are certain behaviors that we can do that'll make it better and behaviors that'll make it worse, right? That seems pretty obvious, but what are they? Well, if someone had just told me this in high school, I would have gotten laid so much more, but I had to learn this decades later from all these experts. One of the marriage therapists said that when people come to him, he's a specialist in repairing relationships and trying to help prevent divorce. When people come to him, it's usually like relationship is broken And it's like going to the ER and saying, I broke my leg 6 years ago. Can you fix it? And he's like, why didn't you come when you first broke your leg? Now it's virtually impossible to fix it. We can try to make things better. There are ways, therapies, and they'll put you in physical therapy. We'll make it better. But what they advise is if anyone listening to this right now is thinking about getting married soon, they all advise the best way you can increase your chances for happiness and longevity in a relationship is through premarital counseling. Some religions force the couple to go through premarital counseling before they are allowed to get married. And they do better than those who don't do it. And the reason is it just helps you to know your partner better. It knows, what you're buying, you're knowing what the product is. And you need to learn what your partner's core values are. What do they think about abortion? How much is too much to spend on a pair of shoes? Do they want kids? How many kids? What religion will the kids be brought up? There's some basic questions, and I put a list of them at the end of the book that I wrote that goes along with the documentary, so that I collected from these experts. If you just have fun and just ask your partners these questions sometime and get to know each other better, you'll have a better chance. Now, let's say you're someone who's listening who's already in a relationship or already married, and the sex is starting to go, you're fighting more, things are not as happy as they used to be. There is one thing you can do that has a good chance of helping all that, according to all the experts. This is what we do wrong and can improve things dramatically if we just did this.
Yeah.
First of all, opposites attract in terms of masculinity and femininity. These certain types of what we call behaviors that tend to be masculine dominant or feminine dominant. I tend to be a masculine dominant person, so I'm more attracted to someone who's more feminine dominant. And it's the same with gay couples. One tends to be more masculine dominant, one's more feminine dominant.
Sure.
And there's all sorts of variations on this, but in general, you do better attracted to someone who is on the opposite pole of yourself on that spectrum. Signing up for a dating site where you answer 1,000 questions about each other is won't tell you really whether you're compatible until you meet in person and get a feeling for each other, because you don't want to be the same. You don't want to find a copy of yourself. The idea is not to marry the duplicate of yourself. It's to find someone who is the opposite energy in terms of masculinity and femininity. Now, if you're the masculine dominant person, try this experiment. You got nothing to lose. Spend 1 week. Try this. When you come home at the end of the day, put your iPhone on airplane mode and turn to your feminine dominant partner and say, honey, how was your day? Or honey, how are you feeling? And then shut up. Don't interject. Don't try to fix it. Don't offer solutions. Only offer empathy. And what does that mean to offer empathy? It means just say things like, oh, aha, oh. It shows you're listening and you're understanding. Oh, that's terrific. Oh, I'm so sorry that happened. Don't start doing, well, why don't you do this? Or you should do that. No shoulds. Don't should bomb your partner. Just listen for 15 to 20 minutes per night. The feminine dominant person needs about 15 to 20 minutes of connection, emotional connection per day. It's like an emotional, it's like a vitamin that their spirit needs. Or if they don't get it, they'll become frustrated. Eventually that leads to anger and then conflict and arguing and, we got to break up. We don't belong together. It's not natural to do this. It doesn't feel natural. We come home and we look at our iPads, we watch TV, we disconnect from each other. But that person that you're with needs 15 to 20 minutes of connection per day. Just try it as an experiment and the sex will get better. The communication will get better. You'll enjoy each other more. You'll be happier. Now, the feminine dominant person, when your partner is giving you this 15 to 20 minutes of emotional connection, making eye contact, listening, empathizing, don't get greedy and ask for 30 minutes and 50 minutes and 2 hours and constant connection, because as Dr. John Gottman puts it, the masculine brain starts flooding. He calls it flooding. It can only handle about up to 30 minutes of discussion about emotional issues before it just gets overwhelmed. It's not designed to handle that much. It can do about 15 minutes is great. And the feminine brain, feminine dominant brain, can handle much more. It's much better designed in that regard. And that's why women and feminine dominant people like to get together and chat and talk, have, coffee clatches and knitting circles, whatever. But so they can just chatter and talk and connect with each other. The masculine dominant brain, they do things where they don't talk so much. They play golf, they go bowling, they go on business trips. You
watch a football game.
Exactly. And that's how they bond. So that's, if you can do one thing, just give 15 minutes of emotive connection. Now, the reverse thing to understand, if you're a feminine dominant listener and you want your masculine dominant partner to be happier and to get along better, understand that what they need is disconnection. Whereas everyone wants to connect, right? And the feminine dominant brain wants constant connection. The masculine dominant brain wants connection also, but once connection is had, then the desire for freedom starts to overwhelm, and then disconnection is desired. And I got to get out of here. I need to go, somewhere, right? John Gray, in his book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, calls it going to the cave. Once a week, a man has to go to his cave, with the garage or the Elks Club or whatever it is. So here's the best way. First of all, allow your partner to disconnect occasionally, and understand it's natural. Allow it, because when that partner returns, they're renewed with desire for you. That's how it's renewed. And if without that disconnection, it's like during COVID-19, when all of us were stuck together, it made things harder and harder to disconnect for a while and recharge that battery. So final note is, the way to do this is announce your disconnection. Honey, I'm going golfing with my friends on Sunday at 11 a.m., but I can't wait to come home and see you for dinner at 7 p.m. So you've announced your disconnection and when you'll reconnect. So your partner doesn't have to be insecure, understands what's happening, and great, go honey, I can't wait to see you when you return. That way, both partners are getting their emotional vitamins, they're getting what they need, because they need different things, and you'll do so much better. So if I was to boil it all down into the two best pieces of advice, that's what it would be.
Which could all be summed up with one word, which is communicate.
And in general, right. And so what does that mean in terms of behavior? That's what I tried to get it down to.
Did you, as you started, did you ever envision you would end up an editor?
No, I had no interest or desire or thought that editing would be my thing. I just wanted to make movies. I wanted to be around movies. I loved movies. And I loved people laughing. My dad was really funny, and he made people laugh all the time. And I wanted to be like my dad, right? And make people laugh. But I'm not a comedian. It's not my thing. It's not, we all have a strength, and you have to find your strength and then practice it until you become the best at it, right? Malcolm Gladwell, put your 10,000 hours in, become the best, and then you'll get people who start offering you jobs to do that thing. People started offering me jobs to edit for them once they saw the editing I was doing on my own projects. It stood out to them because editing comedy is especially difficult compared to other forms of editing. Yeah. And there are reasons for that, I discovered, and I put it in my book. Yeah. But I found I was good at it. Okay. People thought I was good at it. And so jobs kept coming in, and it's such a great job. It's a way I can be creative daily editing. And it's enjoyable. I work with funny people. I get to laugh all the time, and editing captured my heart.
Editing is easily the best part of movie making. Wouldn't you say so, Gil? It's being in the editing suite. It's more satisfying.
I mean, everything that you prep for in a movie is geared towards what's going to happen in the editing room. Yeah. And everything you're going to shoot or not shoot, or decide you need more of something, has to do with the implication of what's going to happen in the editing room. So yeah, I mean, to me, for me, it's always been music. I always approach, as you know, Alan, every time I've directed anything, I spend agonizing time trying to figure out what's the music, what's the style of the music. Is it Louis Armstrong in the 1920s, or is it contemporary, or is it hip hop? And that gives me something to hang on to when I'm trying to formulate whatever it is we're writing or directing. But the editing, that's where it all ends up. That's where it all comes together, either in a good way or a bad way.
It's where movies actually happen. there's a very famous story about Ralph Rosenblum when he was editing Annie Hall. And prior to, before Ralph sat down and really edited the movie, apparently it was a mess. There was no shape to it whatsoever. And he was the one who suggested the stand-up bits here and there, just as a way to link the whole thing together, to give it some kind of structure. And really, as the director who we cannot speak of anymore, but when he got his Academy Award, really, it should have gone to Ralph Rosenblum, because really, Ralph made that movie happen. Yeah. It was a mess before Ralph touched it.
Yeah. The argument I make in my book, Cut to the Monkey, is that you should be a filmmaker who edits, not an editor who cuts films.
Yeah.
You should be adept at all the aspects of storytelling, because the editor is making the final rewrite of the script. And so you should choose your editor as well as carefully as you choose your screenwriter, because you're trusting them with your story.
Alas, you cannot write a script the way that it would be cut. It would be an insane jumbled mess. If we're writing really is at best, it's the floor plan for what is to come. And when all the pieces are there, it is really in the editing that the house comes together.
Here's the metaphor Alec Berg used. He's a creator of Barry, and I worked with him on Curb Your Enthusiasm, and he was on Silicon Valley. He said, the script is the recipe. You write the recipe for making some delicious dinner. That's the script writing process. Then production is shopping at the store, getting the items and the elements and the things you need. Sometimes they're sold out of one thing, so you can't get it. You got to get something else. So you get as much of what's on the list as possible. Now you hand the recipe and all the ingredients to the chef, and the editor is the chef.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you going to choose that chef carefully, or you give that to just any chef? Right? The chef's kind of important to the process.
The editor's the organizing principle.
And you tend to find editors are, they're kind of a quiet bunch. They're not really vocal. You don't hear a lot about them, because to be a good editor, part of the recipe is you have to be able to get along with everybody and withstand people's tempers and tantrums and emotional ups and downs, and you have to support them emotionally, and you've got to be there and kind of be the cheerleader. This is going to work out. We're going to figure it out. So they're kind of easygoing, reliable personalities. It's a necessary element for the editing room.
Yeah, but I find that they're constantly analyzing, regrouping that puzzle. Can I find this piece here and put it over there? And what's the emotional integrity that I'm trying to accomplish by doing it this way or doing it that way? Part of their quiet demeanor really has to do with what that is and what they're really thinking about.
Yeah, I feel I often use the example of like Rain Man in a box of matchsticks. You have to be good at knowing where all those pieces go, or how many pieces have you got? What does it mean? An editor named Ivan Ladizinski put it this way. He said, when I asked him how he chooses the pieces, he says, the footage tells me what to do. I look at it and then I know where to put pieces. Yeah. His brain is designed in such a way that he can put puzzles together.
Yeah.
It's a natural part of who he is.
But part of putting it together was also imagining, okay, we're going to dissolve from here to there. The music cue will start here before the cut, and we'll drop it here, and this sound will blend across there. You have to think on so many levels, so many dimensions. It's multi-dimensional thinking for hours on end.
Right. Music. Exactly. You can ruin something with the wrong music. Yeah. Everything's great, but the music ruins it. Or you can go to that next level. I mean, my process is to finish a scene or a cut without music and make it work on its own without the music. Then bring the music in to amplify the emotions that are there. Ken Burns told me that he does the opposite. He will record the music first and then start editing to the music he loves.
Well, hey, it works. And certainly it makes where to cut pretty well. It's on that beat or it's on that counter beat. It tugs the audience forward like nothing else.
There isn't an absolute. There are just ways to get there into, you want an emotional reaction from an audience, right? Either anger, laughter, or tears, or all three. The greatest movies have all three. And however you get there, there are different paths, and there are ways that work better than others, but that's the goal.
You can take the same bits of information, and depending upon how you arrange them, this first, second, third, fourth, the same story can be a mystery, can be a comedy, it can be a drama.
Terms of Endearment is one of my favorite examples because it's gut-wrenchingly emotional and serious and hilariously funny, and it makes you angry too. And that's a perfect mixture.
Yeah.
Recently, I saw a film called Riders of Justice, starring Mads Mikkelsen, which is an action film, right? But it's got really serious moments and existential concepts, and it's really funny. It's the funniest comedy I've seen in years as well. And so that blend is brilliant.
One last question for you, Roger. How do you cut funny?
Faster. It's no matter how the writer envisioned it or wrote it, or the editor or the director directed it, or the actors thought it should be, generally it always should be faster.
Yeah.
And I'm cutting out the pauses, the ums, the nos, the breathing. Like some shows like Veep, nobody ever breathes. It's nonstop talking because Billy Wilder was the template from a movie like 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Where, James Cagney was just nonstop, and it's hilarious. Now, there are other shows like The Office that I worked on, or Better Call Saul is a best example, or Breaking Bad, where there's lots of pauses, but they've earned the right to have pauses because at any moment, extreme violence can break out, is what we're taught as the viewer. And so the pause...
those are like Pinter pauses in the theater. I mean, the Pinter pauses were filled with...
But they're earned. You have to earn those pauses. My job is generally to remove all the unnecessary pauses. And so when there is a pause, it's because it itself is an emphasis.
Yes. Huh. You have imparted so much wisdom in an hour and a half. It almost seems people should be pouring money onto our heads collectively. We've answered the questions about the universe, about marriage, and about how to make a funny movie. Well, what more do you want from life, people?
Well, I don't think this is a consolation, but I've been married happily for 30 years to the same woman, and I've never been anything but heterosexual. But had I met you 35 years ago, I'm not sure I would have gone the same route. And I mean that as a compliment in the nicest way possible. This was very informative and very instructive. And I think our audience will gain a lot from listening to what you have to say.
Well, can you tell me what is, I'd asked this a lot too when I was making the documentary. How did you hold it together for 35 years going strong?
I don't think
you're about to be in the sequel, Gil.
Yeah, which I would love to do. I think we should do a sequel with you.
What's your secret? How do you two hold it together? Do you have one?
No, I don't know. It just sort of happened. I mean, we're still, very much into each other and care about each other, and it keeps going.
You haven't killed each other yet.
I haven't killed each other. Came close a few times, but then we got through it.
A friend of mine said, I love asking that question. A friend of mine, when I asked him, he said, one day I realized it's just cheaper to keep her.
Yeah, attrition, one way or the other. Ultimately, that wins the game. Again, thank you so much for spending time with us, Roger. And
of course,
thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jodie Webster, and Jason Jodie, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific crypt content.